Thank you. I hope everybody is able to hear me. Um, so we're going to be talking about what deepfakes are, the kind of uses as well as misuses of deepfakes, and how AI technology is being used to combat them. I am a professor at Arizona State University, and I'm also with AI Foundation. And in fact, I talk a bunch of tools that AI Foundation itself is developing and making available for defending against deepfakes. Okay, so for the possibility that there may be some people who don't actually know what deepfakes are, I thought I will get Obama to introduce it for you.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit.
Okay, let's not get into that. So anyway, clearly there is a lot of deepfake technology that was enabled through AI that has been essentially making waves everywhere. And so actually there is an article that I have, a column that I have that you can read at leisure, sort of providing some general introduction to both the impacts as well as how people are trying to handle them. What I'm trying to do in this talk is to sort of give you a sense of how AI wrought deepfake technology, how AI is being used to fight deepfake technology. But along the way, we'll also notice that the same technology that produces deepfakes actually has many useful uses. Synthetic reality is a great technology that we can use for all sorts of good things. But then, of course, you put people in the loop, they will find ways of misusing technology, which is basically what the deepfakes have become. So I want to get to that by starting from basically the whole hype about AI that all of you are familiar with. And then one of the interesting questions, of course, is AI as an area has been around for 60 years, and suddenly it's been all over the place in the news and everything in like last 4 or 5 actually last maybe 7, 8 years. The question then is what has changed? And in fact, the point that I would like you to understand is that it's because of the way AI developed and how, in fact, it wound up focusing on perceptual intelligence technologies that it wasn't able to do before. So as you can see from this many intelligences slide, the human babies actually come into this world knowing how to see the world, knowing how to manipulate the world, and showing some emotions, then showing some social intelligence. Only much later do they show cognitive reasoning intelligence, taking SATs and going to schools and so on and so forth. What's interesting is that AI systems actually developed almost the opposite way. Way back in 80s and 90s, we had reasoning and expert systems. Those of you old enough might remember that Kasparov was dethroned back in 90s by Deep Blue. So we could do reasoning at that time, what the AI technology wasn't able to do as well, and it's become much more feasible right now, is perceptual intelligence, doing perceptual tasks. So in some sense, we are going in the opposite direction. AI is a baby which can essentially do calculus, but has only recently figured out how to see the world. Keep that in the back of your mind. But these specific changes, these advances in perceptual technologies wound up being very crucial in essentially developing synthetic reality. So in particular, actually, the perceptual intelligence technology has led to lots of impressive feats. Many of you are familiar with this. We can get pretty good accuracy with lots and lots of bad failure modes. We can still get pretty good accuracy in image recognition. Once you can recognize, we can also generate images. And the interesting thing is kids who can't make full sentences or do math can have dreams which are full of people in their full glory. So AI systems with perceptual intelligence can actually dream up people. All these people, they don't exist. Okay, and so these are all made up people. And similarly, you can also dream up voices, and you can also dream up text. So for example, there is like an essay that GPT-2 wrote, and more recently, GPT-3 has gone on to do an entire article that it published in The Guardian in a couple of weeks back. So things are kind of heating up in terms of the ability of AI systems to develop synthetic reality. Now, why is this actually able to? It turns out that the perceptual intelligence technology winds up being very much a tacit knowledge that we don't know how to tell computers how to do. So they have to learn from data. And one of the real reasons why perceptual intelligence technology has taken off in the most recent years is exactly the name of this particular meeting, big data plus AI together. So learning from big data has been the driver. So learning the distributions of massive corpora of web data, whether it is images, whether it is Reddit articles, whether it is voices, becomes the driver for synthetic reality technology. Now this learned distribution can be sampled. You can sample from this distribution so that you'll be able to find new entities that you have never actually encountered before. Or you can also use it to complete any entity. For example, you can give a prompt and ask GPT-3 to write an essay. That's sort of a conditional sampling idea. So in general, the two big technologies that are used for these sorts of things is, for example, for image synthesis, generative adversarial networks have been used. That's on the right top. And then for the language generation, essentially the transformers and recurrent neural networks have become the vehicle of choice. And both of them eat tons and tons of data, either image or text data, to actually learn the distributions. And they use them to come up with the synthetic reality, which is kind of important. So now generating this alternate reality, the kinds of things you can do is, and all sorts of things, these are the old times already. It's like 2-3 years back, we could provide an horse, you can get a zebra, you can provide an image in the winter time, and you can get a reasonable image, approximation of how that image would look in the summertime. And then you can also basically come up with a whole bunch of faces. So in this particular case, a whole bunch of glamorous faces that AI systems were able to dream up because they have learned the distribution of apparently the glamorous faces, okay, which is a pretty impressive thing to be able to do. Now, this sort of synthetic reality generation has many beneficial uses. Okay, so of course, in entertainment, there's great uses for this. After all, suspension of disbelief is really the cornerstone of all entertainment. You can also use it for training. You can use it for computer-supported cooperative work. So, for example, GPT-3 might be generating like a rough improve it. Humans might come in and try to improve it. So, in fact, there have been uses like, for example, in the New York Times in July, talked about this way of using deepfakes in documentaries. So, for example, they were talking about people who are dissidents in Chechnya, and if they are actually, if you show their videos, they would be persecuted. The old way of doing it would be to kind of put their faces in dark, but that doesn't give you a visceral feeling of what they're saying. So what New York Times did essentially is to actually use deepfake technology to come up with stories of these people being told by other people's faces. Okay, that's something that's a very useful use of this. Another very interesting use, this predates actually the deepfake AI technology, is this Holocaust survivor project, where they essentially did more or less somewhat semi-automatic way of preserving memories and of people, the last generation of the people who have gone through Holocaust, so that they can be used to teach the new generations of students what actually happened then. And this is a much more visceral way of training. This is something, if you have this in mind, in fact, you can use that same idea not just for Holocaust, but also for essentially any person can be used. You can develop mind twins for them. In fact, AI Foundation, the company that I'm a chief AI officer for, actually has been looking at developing mind twins for anybody. And in fact, one of their current projects is digital depict, which has been covered quite extensively in the media, where Deepak Chopra, essentially, instead of the real guy being there, you can have his mind twin taking you through the yoga, meditation, etc. This is obviously not just for Deepak Chopra. It can be for anybody. It can be for your loved ones who are no longer with you, but then the mind twins can be used to interact with them. These are all the nice, good, happy, warm uses of synthetic reality technology. In fact, even within AI, just the nuts and bolts of AI, there's been interest in using synthetic reality to generate data to train AI systems. You must have heard a lot about how many scenarios there is not enough data that is available. And so people have actually been trying to use this technology to develop more data of a particular property. For example, you get a bunch of X-rays and then you generate more X-rays. There are all sorts of pitfalls with it, but this is the kind of direction that's also being used for synthetic technology. Now, that's all good and well and good, but now let's talk about the negative side of this sort of technology. If perception is indeed, we call perception is reality, then what happens to reality when AI controls our perception? Or I can control your perception through AI technology. I can do voice spoofing. I can command your Alexas. I can deceive you into thinking that I'm your mother calling you and asking for money. I can do image spoofing, can make autonomous vehicle mistake a stop sign for a speed sign, for example. I can do identity spoofing. All those things are possible. And so, in fact, there's a whole entire set of impacts that come up when deepfake technology starts becoming, being used by regular actors with differing motives. Some of them are rogue actors, some of them are, basically enemies and so on. So the question is, if the perception won't be reality, then what can we do when, AI technology takes over your perception? And some of that is what I want to get you to understand. So for example, here are two pictures. One of them is computer generated. It's basically a synthetic reality image, and the other is the image of a real person. And it will be interesting. In fact, if I had time, if I was doing it in person, I would have asked for a show of hands as to how many of you think which of the images is a fake one. You can think about this. I'll tell you as we go along later on. But it turns out one of them is fake, one of them is real. You can't even tell. Most of you can't tell which is which. Economists actually had an essay writing competition, and then they put GPT to write an essay and submitted it to the judges. And the judges actually went through the essay. They thought it wasn't like the greatest essay, but it looked like a reasonable high school student essay. And they did give, you're not passing, but it's a passable essay. So this was already a year back. And of course, AI can generate fake news stories. We talk a lot about fake news. Oftentimes, this fake news is being made laboriously by somebody in Russia, or Eastern Europe, or Australia, or Arizona. Actually, they have to type these things. Now you can have these systems like GPT-3 generate news stories with prompts. And even before GPT-3, Wall Street Journal basically said that 75% of the people found an AI-made fake news story to be real. This is the times that we are living in. And of course, Guardian, as I mentioned earlier, has wrote an entire op-ed had an entire op-ed written by GPT-3 system with a little bit of cherry picking, but still quite impressive technology. So you can see how quickly you would not be able to tell the reality from fake reality. Here's another situation where some company was just basically giving away 100,000 fake faces generated by AI free to download. In these days of NBA games being held in empty auditoriums, imagine you can put all of these faces in all those made up chairs, and you'll have like an audience, and you can do this for like the political rallies too, presumably. So this is other kind of a thing. So we already talked about Obama one. Let me tell you a little about this. This one is a very impressive app from China called the Zhao, and it was actually taken out very quickly by Chinese government. This came out last year, and the interesting thing is, you could just get this app on your cell phone, and you can get this app in your cell phone and be able to put yourself into any movie you want. That's just amazing. That means anybody can develop synthetic fake videos, fake reality. You don't need a Microsoft or a Google sitting behind you, which is a very interesting potential. And of course, even last year, China had like a fake anchor, a deep fake anchor telling real news, apparently, for them. And then, this thing is just going on and on. This week, I think somebody on YouTube, essentially amateurs, trying to, for example, put Gal Gadot in the 1970s original Wonder Woman, in place of Linda Carter. So anybody can develop these, realities. Many of these people actually say this is deep fake, but what happens if they don't tell you? What if, in fact, what you are seeing is fake and you don't actually realize that? This is something that is causing a lot of anguish to people, significant concern in the government and policy circles. For example, first federal legislation on deepfakes has been signed into law. California has laws to tackle deepfake videos in politics as well as pornography. This is another unfortunate thing about it. Actually, deepfakes are being used to develop pornographic videos in what is basically a kind of a revenge porn sort of a scenario where somebody else is being put in a very bad predicament by actually having their likeness be present in a pornographic video, for example. There's a flood of deepfake laws and proposals in the US that are coming out right now. What I want to do in the concluding part here is, if AI is part of the problem in creating fake reality, it turns out it's also very much a part of the solution to defend reality. Not for very long, but right now at least, AI is able to look for patterns that we may not be able to see and be able to actually tell you with some accuracy whether things are machine generated versus actually real entities. So basic idea in detection is to use AI itself to catch on to the imperfections that the humans might overlook. You may not have noticed this imperfection either in the image or in the voice or in the video. And so basically, you have background inconsistencies. What they look for is in the images, we look for background inconsistencies, splotches, pixel level statistics. In videos, things like correlation with lip movements, voice signatures. So for example, remember I told you the 100,000 faces? It turns out if you take very careful look at some of them, you notice that some of them actually have all sorts of funny, interesting imperfections. The lady on the left-hand side has two differently colored eyes, which is quite rare. I mean, unless you are happily aware of these kinds of people, it's very quite rare to have one eye being one color, another eye being a different color, and then are differently sized eyes. So these sort of things, the technology has failure modes that you can catch on. You can use the water splotches, for example, to figure out the background. Becomes actually a very interesting way to figure out whether an image is made up. It turns out, in fact, those of you who have dreams, you realize that oftentimes the problem with the dream is not that you can dream of a face of a person, but the background story makes no sense, because the background of the picture or background of the story, getting that right is much harder. Whereas if you're just taking a picture, both the foreground and the background will be there in the picture anyway. So that can be used to actually check for it. In general, for at least right now, some of the synthetic image generation technology is bad at counting numbers. And so, for example, also it's bad at sometimes with the glasses. So those sorts of failures of the current technology can be used against it to look for the deepfakes. Same thing can be done to some extent in AI-generated essays. Okay, that's also possible. In fact, to actually do this at a scale, what people have been doing in AI as well as in industry is to crowdsource deepfake detection technology. For example, there are public competitions to develop deepfake detection technology. For example, one by Facebook, which has a bunch of deepfakes and normal pictures, and then you want some kind of a Kaggle kind of a competition where people are trying to write detectors to see which one is fake versus real. one of the very interesting parts here is just like cybersecurity, where you don't know where the next attack is going to come from and what type of attack will be. The type of deepfake technologies might be changing. They're a moving target. And so you need almost red teams working on developing new deepfake generation technologies, which then have to be captured by the recognition technology. This is a cat and mouse game that will continue. One other thing, this is like a big thing for AI Foundation, a lot also along with the rest of the world about election manipulation. The biggest worries in deepfakes is their ability to manipulate democracies. They have manipulated videos of candidates. It's one thing to manipulate, a Nancy Pelosi video or an Obama video. At least when you do that, many news organizations will catch you. What if you wind up manipulating the video of a small house race, in a state house race somewhere, where people don't have enough of an interest to check the veracity of the video or the picture, and then other people will start believing these untruths. And so how do you catch these manipulated videos? And already there's even, not just in 2016, even now, there's a significant amount of interest in essentially affecting US elections. So like Facebook and Twitter has to remove huge number of Twitter accounts with faces of real people, except they're all made up. They're all deepfake faces, for example. So one of the things that we've been looking at is this Reality Defender platform that we have made available from AI Foundation side. Notice that I told you AI Foundation is very interested in using synthetic reality technology for good uses, such as this digital depict or other mind twins. But being sort of a responsible company, we have been thinking also about how can we help in stopping misuse of this technology. And so Reality Defender 2020 is this tool that is available that you can actually look at it, rd2020.org, which is a non-partisan, non-commercial effort to help reporters and campaigns and journalists to figure out whether a particular video or image is potentially a fake image or a potentially fake video. So what we wound up becoming is sort of a broker, a clearinghouse for bringing technologies that are looking at detection to people who need those technologies, access to those technologies to have their images checked. So for example, for the journalists, they can actually upload, once you register with RD2020, journalists can upload their piece of media to be evaluated. The platform analyzes and provides a result about its confidence about what is its confidence that it is actually real versus fake, and how worrisome, how confident it is in its classification, as well as what are the reasons it believes it is actually fake. Those are the things that we are making available. So this has been going on from 2017, which is almost the prehistory of deepfakes. But now, more recently, this has taken on a life of its own. With, for example, some interest from general civic organizations about using this tool, as well as more recently, Microsoft partnered with AI Foundation to actually provide both funding as well as more tools that we can use in the tool chest to actually look for detecting deepfakes. Okay, so that's something that we are doing right now. So these are the kinds of things that are going on, including, of course, our own RD 2020 project for approaches for detecting deepfakes. But let's not kid ourselves. This is a moving target. There will be new technologies developing deepfakes, and so in the long term, there really would be a time when you can't tell the difference between AI-generated versus real image or real video. And in the long term, we will then need cryptographic authentication techniques. So upfront, somebody, essentially a third party, basically providing an authentication that what you are seeing, the source of that image, is actually authenticated. That's pretty much the only way we'll get out of this problem. So in long term, coexisting with deepfakes requires essentially two things. It might help us. For example, one is we will have to, as I said, resort to cryptographic authentication. The second is, on the bright side, our own vulnerability to deepfakes is likely to reduce significantly as we continue to coexist with deepfakes. Already right now, the younger generation don't believe everything they see to the level older people actually do, because many of us have grown up thinking we can believe what we see with the eyes. And so we actually say, show me the proof, as if somehow eyes cannot be deceived. But unfortunately, that is something that we have to come out of as time goes on. And when that vulnerability reduces, then the deepfakes will become part of our ecosystem and we'll be able to deal with them too. So, in fact, as I told somebody, writing this article in the New York Times, that in the short term, detection will be reasonably effective. But in the long term, it's just impossible to distinguish between the real pictures and fake pictures. And either cryptographic authentication has to be used, or, we will hopefully get used to desensitize to a point where we won't right away believe things that we see. Again, the point that I want to bring in is the second part that I was mentioning there is that right now is the most vulnerable time, because there is still enough of us, we tend to believe what we read, what we see. This is why deepfakes are a much bigger problem right now than it might be, many years from now. And that's exactly why I believe that AI Foundation's interest in doing this RD 2020 project is, motivated by the fact that this is really the time when we need help from our own AI technology to actually detect deepfakes. Again, I showed you this article that you can actually read with more information about some of this background. I want to summarize with this last slide, defending reality in the era of deepfakes. By the way, I put the slides on the chat window. I think the one of the chat message places there on your platform. So defending basically advances in perceptual intelligence technology have made it possible to generate synthetic reality, an image, video, audio, text, etc. with AI technology. Synthetic reality has many beneficial uses, but it can also be weaponized as deepfakes. Remember that fakes and forgeries existed way before AI technology. It's just that they had to be manually manufactured by humans. And so that would take time. Now, this is these fakes on steroids, because AI technology can develop these much more rapidly. And so how do you deal with that? Fighting deepfakes requires dealing with essentially a moving target. Current AI technologies are being used coupled with some regulations, government regulations. And I mentioned to you Reality Defender platform that does help in deepfake detection in elections. And in fact, right now, several journalists and news organizations are essentially using that platform currently. But in the long term, detection might be infeasible. We will either have to rely on cryptographic authentication or hope that our own vulnerability to believing our eyes and ears will reduce as we get used to this new normal. After all, none of us thought that we can get used to a new normal of sitting at home and giving international talks. And here we are. In about 6 months, we became a new normal. I'm pretty sure as AI technology pushes so much of the synthetic reality in front of us, we'll get used to that too. One of the greatest things for humans is their adaptability. But it's this transition period that is the most vulnerable, and that's where we need AI technology's help to sort of defend against a problem that AI technology created. So I'll stop here, and if there are any questions, etc., I'll take it. Otherwise, I can look at, you can contact me.